is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
From London, this is The World Today.
Hello, I'm Robin Dwyer. Welcome to the programme. Our top stories. The United Nations warns of an even more hellish scenario in Gaza, with aid operations under increasing pressure. Israel pushes into southern Gaza, a new stage in its ground offensive that it says will be difficult militarily. Phasing out fossil fuels to be included in the COP28 draft agreement, but the climate summit registers more fossil fuel lobbyists than ever before. And the UK government makes another attempt at reviving its plan to send asylum seekers to Rwanda as it signs a new treaty. We begin in Gaza, where the United Nations is warning of an even more hellish scenario as Israel increases its attacks against the militant group Hamas. Palestinian officials say dozens of people have been killed in Israeli bombardment of refugee camps in central Gaza and Khan Yunis in the south, which has been partially evacuated. Aid groups say there are no safe zones anywhere in the besieged enclave, and the situation is getting worse by the hour. The International Committee of the Red Cross says the conflict is a moral failure in the face of the international community.
I've just visited the European Gaza Hospital, and the things I saw there is beyond anything that anyone should be in a position to describe. I'm calling on all parties, on everyone who has an influence, to de-escalate and to find the military solutions to what is an immense suffering of the people on both sides. The ICRC will do its utmost to help alleviate and reduce the suffering, but we can't do this alone. And there's not only a humanitarian solution to this, there must be a political one.
Israel is pressing ahead with its ground offensive into southern Gaza. Officials warn the next phase could be difficult militarily. In what appears to be the biggest ground assault since a truce collapsed last week, residents in Khan Yunis say Israeli tanks have entered the city for the first time. Israel has again ordered people to leave the area. The IDF says there will be a 90-minute pause in fighting near Rafah on the southern border to allow aid in. Well, let's talk to our correspondent Sarah Coates in Tel Aviv. So, Sarah, what's the latest on Israel's military campaign in southern Gaza?
Hello there, Robin. Well, look, the military has confirmed it is operating inside that southern city of Khan Yunis, saying this is where it believes this Hamas leadership is hiding. Now, it's also using drones to drop leaflets over that city, telling people to evacuate further south down to Rafah, saying it's for their own safety. Now, this is the IDF has posted on X, telling people not to use that main road, that Salah al-Din road, which runs from the north to the south of the Gaza Strip, telling people they need to find alternate evacuation routes. We've also heard from the IDF international spokesperson having this to say.
So what civilians should do to stay safe is listen to the instructions that are coming out from our Twitter accounts, from our website, and also to look at the leaflets that are landing in their areas. We're also reaching out with other means to the populations to move. It will be more detailed, it will be more contained and more modular. They should, again, we've been giving these requests in the last few days, move from this area, this zone, to this other zone, to get out of harm's way.
And look, Robin, as Israel continues its bombardment of the Gaza Strip, Hamas continues to fire rockets into Israeli territory in the south and right into the centre. Around half an hour before we came on air, there was a massive barrage shot from the Gaza Strip into Israel. Huge bangs going off above my head, and we can confirm that one of those rockets has gone through the roof of a school just here in Tel Aviv, another rocket falling in the street not so far from where I am. So certainly a very, very busy day on the ground right across the region.
Sarah, families of some of those people taken hostage by Hamas have met Israel's war cabinet today. What came out of that meeting?
Well, look, Robin, that meeting is ongoing. These people are absolutely furious. They say the government has absolutely humiliated them by making them beg to ask for a meeting. Now, that was originally slated for Wednesday. It was now brought forward to today. But these people say that the government needs to do absolutely everything in its power to bring these 137 people home. Now, many of your viewers might remember back in 2011, there was that prisoner swap deal. There was one soldier, Gilad Shalit. He was swapped with more than 1,000 Palestinian prisoners. And this is what these people want. They say that doesn't matter how much it costs, the Israeli government needs to get these people back. Now, Robin, there are also fears over a report that's circulating in the Wall Street Journal today. It says that Israel is mulling a plan to potentially flood these tunnels inside the Gaza Strip with seawater from the Mediterranean to try and flush these Hamas fighters out. But what these families are worried about is that it could instead, if it does go ahead, it could instead drown their loved ones. So certainly a lot of anger, a lot of rage and a lot of sadness on the ground here in Israel.
Sarah, thank you very much. Our correspondent Sarah Coates there in Tel Aviv. Well, that's the picture in Israel. Let's head now to Gaza and talk to our correspondent there, Noor Harazin. So, Noor, strikes intensifying right across Gaza. Give us a sense, if you can, of the humanitarian situation there now.
Well, basically, Gaza is facing its worst humanitarian crisis while being attacked by the Israeli military. I mean, I need hours to speak about what is really happening here on the ground, but there is no fuel, there is no electricity, there is no water, there is no food. Even us, you know, journalists, medical teams, people who are working in organizations, we do not have access to food and water and really any electricity, even the networks and the internet, because of the latest Israeli incursion in Khan Yunis city, in eastern Khan Yunis, and also cutting the Salah ad-Din way between middle Gaza and southern Gaza. There is only little of goods and also even vegetables that are going through Khan Yunis to here to middle Gaza. So we can say that now there is besieged northern Gaza, besieged middle Gaza and besieged southern Gaza, and this is very much affecting the humanitarian situation. It is actually getting worse, even though there is a humanitarian aid entering the Gaza Strip. The UN distribution is very slow here on the ground, but for now the UN is only distributing inside Rafah and Khan Yunis, which means that there is hundreds of thousands of people here in middle Gaza and also in northern Gaza that do not have access to their needs.
And Israel has ordered more evacuations in southern Gaza. Where can those people go?
Well, first of all, there is no places safe in Gaza. People are getting killed wherever they are. For Palestinians here, a safe area means that less people will get killed in that area. It does not mean that they are safe. Right now, I am inside the Shuhada al-Aqsa Hospital, which is located in Deir al-Balah. And just half an hour ago, an Israeli airstrike hit a residential building that is just 200 meters away from my current location. And we saw ambulances, we saw the bodies of those killed, we saw children killed, women killed, and according to doctors here, 34 people were killed in the Abu Hassanin home attack here in Deir al-Balah, and this is just in one Israeli airstrike, adding that no evacuation order have been released for the people of Deir al-Balah or the people of Middle Gaza. So yes, there is Israeli attacks, Israeli warplanes happening everywhere here along the coastal enclave. Where the Palestinians do go, I mean, it's impossible to evacuate more than 1 million people to such a small area in southern Rafah or Al-Mawasi refugee camp, adding the fact that the Al-Mawasi camp, which the IDF have been talking about over the past week about being a safe area, it is just farms of sand. So people are actually now putting their tents on the sand. There's is no electricity, there is no water supplies, there is no food, there is actually nothing there.
Noor, thank you very much. Our correspondent Noor Harasin in Gaza. Qatar has urged the UN Security Council to force Israel to go back to the negotiating table. In a speech to Gulf leaders attending a summit in the Qatari capital, the country's emir said it was shameful that the international community had allowed Israel's actions to continue for so long. Qatar has been leading negotiations between Israel and the Palestinian armed group Hamas. Phasing out fossil fuels has been included in a draft final agreement at the UN Climate Summit in Dubai. With global emissions from coal, oil and gas set to hit record highs this year, it's the defining issue at COP28. But there's been controversy after it emerged that nearly 2,500 fossil fuel lobbyists registered to attend the event. That's more than the combined number of delegates from the 10 countries most vulnerable to climate change. Well, our correspondent Radhika Bajaj is in Dubai. So, Radhika, a phase out of fossil fuels on the table, but also plenty of people who'll be against that option.
Yes, absolutely. And primarily that's going to be two groups. The first group will be the countries in the developing world who still need cheaper fossil fuels to keep their economies from progressing, and they want to lift out millions of poor people out of poverty. They are already facing dire impacts in terms of climate events, and they are having to use resources to build a climate resilient infrastructure. They are also the countries who need a lot more support when it comes to climate finance, and these are the countries that are not very keen on having very strong language around phasing out of fossil fuels. And if you look at countries like India and China, where the populations are large and fossil fuels are being used at record levels, these are also the countries who are installing renewable power capacity at record levels too. But a complete catch-up is going to take more time and more money. Now, the second group of people, or countries rather, who will be opposed to very strong language on fossil fuels is, of course, the oil-producing nations of the world. Their fortunes, their economies are completely reliant on oil money, and it is unlikely that they will give into demands of very strong timelines when it comes to phasing out fossil fuels. But at the same time, no language around fossil fuels also looks impossible, given that we have had so much of conversation around the global stocktake report, which tells us that the world is very far off course when it comes to meeting the goals of the Paris agreements. The first option in the draft text was listed as an orderly and just phase out of fossil fuels. The second called for accelerating efforts towards phasing out unabated fossil fuels, and the third option would be no mention of fossil fuels phase out at all. The draft text actually also includes an option for countries to agree to a rapid phase out of unabated coal power this decade and an immediate halt to building new CO2 emitting coal power plants. However, a second option of the same paragraph would again mention no coal at all. So as you can tell, this is not going to be an easy one to negotiate at all.
Radhika, thank you very much. Our correspondent Radhika Bajaj in Dubai. Extreme weather and damaged ecosystems are threatening the lives of millions of climate refugees. The United Nations Refugee Agency says more than 21 million people are forcibly displaced each year by weather-related events, and there could be 1.2 billion climate refugees by 2050. Jamie Owen spoke to Filippo Grandi, the UN's High Commissioner for Refugees.
One of the most catastrophic impacts of the climate crisis is on people very often in very fragile settings that lose everything because of that. Either because they are affected by climate directly, natural disasters, for example, drought, deprivation of resources, or because, and this is very frequent, this combines with conflict and creates waves of refugees. So our appeal to states, to international financial institutions, to civil societies, don't neglect that aspect of the climate crisis. And as you finally start planning for resources, for adaptation, for mitigation, take into account that there is also that dimension that needs particular interventions. I think it's beginning to sink in, this message. This COP28 is the first one that devotes a substantive amount of time to these discussions, but the journey to travel is still very long.
According to UNHCR, I think over 70% of the world's refugees and displaced people come from the most climate vulnerable countries. Are their voices being heard?
They are beginning to be heard, but not enough. Some representatives of affected communities are here. Still very few, I think. You know, I'll give you an example. Next week, UNHCR is organizing, it's after the COP, is organizing a global refugee forum in Geneva. This is our second time to do this. It's the biggest global meeting on refugees. We've been able to mobilize 300 refugees from different parts of the world. They'll come and tell their stories and advocate for solutions and explain their needs. There needs to be an equivalent representation in meetings like COP. We're still very far from that, but we're working on it, and we think that this space that is being created is useful. But like everything in this extremely complex environment, it goes slowly. Too slowly because, meanwhile, in those very fragile areas you mentioned, people are affected probably like nowhere else. The impact is felt by the people themselves.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead. Heavy snowfall in southern Germany paralyzes air and rail connections, leaving thousands of travelers stranded.
Ever wondered what's the difference between a bear and a bull market? Where are the cash cows? And who are the lame ducks? And what exactly are black swans? Grey rhinos? And unicorn companies? Make sense of it all with Global Business, only on CGTN.
I think it should be more global cooperation.
I would like to hear more the voice of the developing countries.
Globalization has lifted more than 1 billion people out of poverty.
The green transition has to happen. It's a necessity.
Well, China and the United States are important powers in the world.
What unites us is much more than what divides us.
And I believe China is committed to this agenda.
Join me, Juliet Mann, to set the agenda at these times every weekend on CGTN.
Events have consequences. Words create impact.
One more offensive in a long line of battles that's been ongoing for more...
Just got to be careful here with some gunshots. Excuse us, excuse us.
The world today matters for your world tomorrow.
The number of casualties is growing quickly.
Why, this is one of the hardest hit towns in the region.
The world today, every day on CGTN.
Welcome back. A reminder of our headlines. The United Nations warns of an even more hellish scenario in Gaza, with aid operations under increasing pressure. Israel pushes into southern Gaza, a new stage in its ground offensive that it says will be difficult militarily. And phasing out fossil fuels to be included in the COP28 draft agreement. But the climate summit registers more fossil fuel lobbyists than ever before. As leaders continue to discuss how to slow down climate change, its effects are already being felt across the world, not least in Latin America, where many people have already had to leave their homes because of extreme weather. Our correspondent Alistair Baverstock reports.
As world leaders meet at the COP28, the climate change issues they discuss are already having human impacts in many of their own countries. In Latin America and the Caribbean, one recent study by Mexican academics estimates that more than 1 million people have been displaced by climate change throughout the region in recent years. In El Salvador, one of Latin America's most impoverished countries, Dimas Monroy's family has farmed the hillsides of the town of Tacuba for generations, but the changing weather is making life unsustainable.
En abril, ya de mayo para allá comienza la lluvia, que son otros 6 meses.
Our 6-month rainy season runs from May. That's when we plant our crops. But this year we had no rain, just like last year and the year before, and temperatures have been very hot.
Unable to make the land produce, local mayor Carlos Milla says the impacts have been widespread.
The effects have been serious. Poverty, malnutrition and migration, all resulting from climate change.
Los terrenos han quedado ya abandonados.
Many farms have been abandoned because they don't produce. It's not just our town. The entire region is living through this crisis.
In neighbouring Guatemala, the excess rain has been equally devastating. A 2020 hurricane altered the course of the Zacapa River beside the town of Jocotan, destroying productive lands which the local community depended on. The response of many has been to leave.
We've been very badly hit by migration. Many people have left our community to go to the United States or other parts of this country because they can't survive here anymore.
But it's not only here. Indeed, the recent study estimates nearly 1.2 million people across Latin America and the Caribbean have suffered displacement as a result of climate change. Brazil alone has seen nearly 500,000 people forced to move amid more extreme climate trends, a phenomenon Dimas Monroy says is always traumatic.
It's painful to leave your birthplace, but when our children have no food and the crisis we face has no solution, we are forced to abandon our homes and leave.
As leaders meet at COP28, the commitments they make will have direct impacts on global migration trends. Alistair Baverstock, CGTN in Central America.
The British government is making another attempt to enact a plan to send asylum seekers to Rwanda. Home Secretary James Cleverly has signed a new treaty designed to secure the controversial policy during a visit to the country. Last month, the UK Supreme Court ruled that its plan to send illegal migrants there was unlawful. The government insists it's needed as part of its overall strategy to cut migration. The bodies of 22 missing hikers have been recovered in Indonesia after a volcano erupted there at the weekend. Rescue operations were halted on Monday when Mount Merapi started spewing smoke and ash again. Dozens of people were on the slopes at the time of Sunday's eruption. One person is still missing. Indonesia's volcano agency says it's issued warnings since 2011 for climbers to stay away from the peak. France is on high alert after detecting more cases of bird flu. Poultry must now be kept indoors to try and reduce the spread of the virus. The first outbreak of the season emerged last week. Bird flu's also been found in other European countries in recent weeks, including Germany, the Netherlands and Belgium. Thousands of protesters have rallied across New Zealand, angry at new government policies which they say are racist towards the indigenous Maori people. The centre-right three-party coalition wants to wind back the use of Maori language, review affirmative action policies and assess how the country's founding treaty document is interpreted in legislation. Days of heavy snowfall have paralysed air and rail connections in southern Germany, leaving many people stranded, including international travellers. Our correspondent Natalie Carney reports from Munich.
The white stuff is absolutely everywhere. According to the weather services here in Germany, more than 40 centimetres of it fell Friday night alone, and it continued on through Saturday. Now, it's been a great joy, of course, for children and for pets, especially considering the sort of warmer winters we've been experiencing the last 2 or 3 years. However, for those who needed to be somewhere over the weekend, it has been relative chaos. The heavy snowfall caused the complete closure of roads, highways, train lines, and the cancellation of many flights across the weekend and into the early part of this week. The Munich airport, the second largest in the country, had to close on Saturday, canceling a number of flights as they cleared away as much snow as they said they would see in an entire average winter season. Now, the same goes for long-distance travel on the Deutsche Bahn train lines. While some lines have begun operating again, many others still remain closed. Winter snow removal services have been working around the clock since Friday to try to clear away all the snow, all the slush on the roads and the highways. But considering we have still been experiencing below zero temperatures here, icy conditions still remain everywhere. Many who did not have to go to the office on Monday or Tuesday chose not to, while some schools across Bavaria chose to remain closed on Monday or offer distance learning for those who struggled to get to the school. The weight of all this snow has also put a lot of pressure on trees and on rooftops across the state of Bavaria. Many tree branches coming down in local parks, and many are concerned about the rooftops of older buildings caving in. Yet all this white stuff has been great news for the many ski resorts and ski hills across Bavaria, allowing many of them to open earlier this season than they normally would do. However, according to meteorologists, it will still take a few more days until everything, at least off the hills, returns to normal. Natalie Carney for CGTN in Munich.
Our headlines again. The United Nations warns of an even more hellish scenario in Gaza, with aid operations under increasing pressure. Israel pushes into southern Gaza, a new stage in its ground offensive that it says will be difficult militarily. And phasing out fossil fuels to be included in the COP28 draft agreement. But the climate summit registers more fossil fuel lobbyists than ever before. And that is the world today. Thanks for watching. There's more news on CGTN Europe's channel on the Telegram app, or scan the QR code on the screen to get stories and updates sent direct to your phone. We're back with more news at the top of the hour. Coming up next, it's World Insight. For now, from all of the team in London, it's goodbye.
Hello and welcome to the weather forecast. I'm Tierney. Well, over to Europe. And low pressure system is likely to bring quite a lot of rain and snow to develop for a good portion of Europe, as well as much colder temperatures, especially for the north, as well as the eastern portion of Europe over the next few days. We'll take a closer look at the wet weather forecast over the next couple of days. Snow will mainly favor the north as well as the eastern portion of Europe, while some wintry mix as well as rainfall is likely to develop here across the majority of the west, central as well as the southern portion of Europe, and several locations across the higher elevations as well as the mountainous areas are even likely to brace for some heavy to torrential amounts of snow over the next few days. So please take necessary precaution to stay safe. Temperature-wise, we can notice that here for the majority of the north as well as the eastern portion of Europe will be rather frigid over the next few days. Most of the high temperatures will be about 10 or even 15 degrees Celsius below freezing, and it will become even colder as we head into the latter portion of this week. So please bundle up and be well prepared under this super freezing condition. And about business and travel, and winter mix for Oslo, Copenhagen, as well as Stockholm. Light snowfall for Helsinki with both the high and low temperatures and negative readings on Thursday. And over to Moscow, we'll also see some snowfall in the morning hours with a high of -14 and low about -18 degrees Celsius.